witnesses, Commissioner Heyer and Commissioner Owen. We'll start out with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll slide right into the number 4 on the agenda, citizen comment period. We have 2 people who signed up for the citizen comment period. We have Tony Overman and Chris Overman. And Mr. Overman, I see in our business items we have a presentation. Is that one and the same, or is it something separate?
It's one and the same.
Okay. So, with your permission, I'll skip over the citizen comment period and go right into the business items. I'm assuming, is that a related, is Chris related to you? Yes. Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. And, do you also want to wait till the business item? Okay. So move into the business items. Business item number 5. It is a presentation of Apple Creek Village Garden Home Development Proposal by Overman Properties. If you would, Mr. Overman.
Is that good? Hello? Yep. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for allowing us to talk to you tonight about something that we're kind of excited about, and hopefully we can get you excited about as well. So I've lived in Garden Ridge for going on 25 plus years, to be honest with you. I don't even know how long now, but 25, 30 years. And been involved with quite a bit of development, predominantly all commercial development. And my son and I have started to partner together and bring him in on the business. And we had been talking about the projects that we really could get our heart around. And I've been talking to the mayor as well about this, and talking to several other people, even went to city council and made a 3-minute quick presentation to them just to let them know that I'm coming with this. And so what I want to present to you today is a concept that I don't know if it's been brought to you in the last 5, 10, 15 years, but I know it's been brought to P&Z and to the city council. But I think it's been 17 years. Nancy, am I 15 years?
Probably about
18 years ago. And if you could, it's noisy. The community of Garden Ridge has a lot of people that are, I would say, aging, like myself, and our kids are grown. They have moved out of the house. We're empty nesters, and then there's also people maybe that just they've got to the point where a large home is really tough for them to handle. Cleaning the house, the yard work, and they just desire a smaller home to live in, but they don't want to leave Garden Ridge. Well, right now in the present time, and it's been this way since the beginning of Garden Ridge, we lose a lot of residents. And before I even started down this path, because again, I've never really done residential, I've done commercial. I have built homes for myself and family members, but not as a business venture. Certainly capable of doing it, I just haven't gone that route. And so I went ahead and I talked to the mayor. I've been talking to people, and from my understanding, we're losing quite a few people that age here in Garden Ridge, and the house is too large for them, but they don't have an option. They have no option right now. And so because I do live here, and because I care about what things look like and what development goes on and how it affects the city, so I started doing some research. So I remembered a place that I went to, and I'm going to say this place to you, and I think that many of you might even recognize it. Can we get a couple, is it just the pictures of the garden homes? So does it still, it's going to roll? Okay. So this is a community called Cottonwood, and it's in Green, Texas, and it's right off of Loop 336 down the road. They're very attractive, pretty homes, but their square footage runs from 1,600 up to, I believe, 2,200. And as you can see, there's no driveways, there's no garage in the front of the house. All of these houses have entrances with their garages in the rear of the homes. And I think it's just real appealing because you don't have that look of a big garage door and a driveway that the standard houses all over the city, and really in every city has. These all have front porches, if you'll notice in each of the pictures. They have lamp posts out front. The streets are lined with trees. The reason why I'm showing you this community, because this is the community, this is the look almost identical to this that I'd like to replicate here in Garden Ridge. The location of this would be if you're all familiar with the old driving range. Everybody familiar with that? Okay, the corner of Bat Cave and, FM 3009 and FM 2252, that corner lot, right next to that is 15 acres. It's right across the street from Regency Place, I believe. And right now it's overgrown, weeds really high. This place was so popular, and people like this place and the look of it and the appeal of it, of 55 and older, they sold out of these houses as fast as they could build them. It went really, really fast. People love it. I took these pictures. I walked up and down the streets talking to neighbors. Do they like it? What's the pros, the cons of it? And they just love it because it accomplished what they were trying to accomplish, and that is to have a home that doesn't put stress and strain on them from taking care of big yards. If you'll notice on most of these pictures, a lot of them have zero landscape the way they've done it, but obviously they could put whatever yard they wanted to. But the purpose for the homes is to give people an option to stay in Garden Ridge, continue being citizens, tax-paying citizens, may I add. And this is the rear, by the way, if you can look at the back side of the alley entrance. So you can get a picture of what the back side of these houses look for. We have a little sheet, and do you have copies of the lots? And I've given them a copy of this as well. Is it all right if we approach you to give these to you? Give them to you? There's a lot of, we realize that when somebody like myself comes to you and is asking to do something that's never been done before, we understand that there's lots of variances and things that would take place because there's no precedence of, the ordinances are for big homes, big lots, setbacks that are very far. And so we understand that there's quite a few ordinances. Nancy has been very helpful in giving us material of those ordinances would need to be to approach you with, of what would need to be asked of in order to make this come to fruition. It is, from my understanding, from my conversation with Nancy, this is zoned B1 already, and B1 does allow for homes like this, not garden homes, but for homes for. Let me restate that. It's zoned for residential. I understand that I have to ask and get permission for garden homes, which we would do that through asking for a special use permit. We also realize that homes like this, obviously our lot sizes are too small for septic systems, so we would be dependent upon the wastewater lines that have already been voted on by the city council to put those in, and that wastewater line would need to serve this particular community because obviously the lot sizes are much smaller than an average lot size here in Garden Ridge. From my understanding, we already have electric there, and water is, it actually has a water well there, but we can't use that for public consumption. We can use it for landscaping, but so we'd have to tie into the water line anyway there, which I believe is across the street. So that's basically what we want to do. We'd like to bring this kind of look and options to Garden Ridge so that we don't lose citizens, and we give people options that want to downsize and still stay here. And I am open for questions. And
How many properties are you looking for in that development?
how many homes right now?
Yeah.
Our civil engineer, which is Dye Engineering, is they've created a design for us right now. Right now, we're looking at about 70 garden homes.
It's fairly impressive.
I would encourage you, each one of you, I really, if you ever go to New Braunfels and you've got 10 minutes to go out of your way, because this is a really cool thing for Garden Ridge if we are able to do this and you pass this through, is to go to this location. It's off of Hans Road. I actually, in what Chris, my son, just handed out to you, or did we give them this? Or no?
Oh, there's a couple more copies.
Or do they need?
I think.
Okay.
I think we have-
Do you have in your hand, it says Apple Creek Village Garden Homes Concept Plan and Development? That's what she's doing now. So it actually kind of tells you the location of where this community is. But you actually turn right where Harley Davidson is off of Loop 337, go down about a block and a half, and it's on the left-hand side. It's a really cute, very, very cute. That's the backside of the
It's
alleyway.
about 2 minutes from downtown Green.
On the way, yeah. That's the backside again, those pictures.
This is one of the better built and planned out developments. Because I did a bunch of research last year, because when we were looking at these type of structures for Garden Ridge, I went to probably 20 different developments. And this is one of the better ones because they weren't zero lot lines, which are not permitted. And they had space in there, and the streets had space. The streets were wide enough to do that. Now, there's one in New Braunfels, right off of Walnut. Can't think of the name of the restaurant that's there, but they're behind Dos Rios. And that's one of the worst ones in the area because there's not enough width in the road. So the traffic gets really bound up. Anybody parks in front of their home in there, then you can't get another car by there. So I looked at one of those and they kind of went down the list. This one came in, so one of the important things for me to look at, Tony, would be that we have enough, you're 36 feet in the street, not 22 or 24.
Right.
So that's you're starting good right there and doing that with that spacing, and that you have some setback on these. I think it's like 5 feet. Looking like this is 5 foot on the BSL on the side.
Where's that one page?
Correct.
Right. And just also that, what you said also triggered something in me to also make sure I tell you is that we will have an HOA for this community. We would create an HOA, and it would be very restrictive. So because you want to keep that community pristine. And one of the ways that I'm really patterning it after Cottonwood, so I'm not some creative visionary that's done this on my own. I'm really copying something that's already doing really well. And they don't allow parking overnight on the street at all. You can park during the day if you're coming to see somebody on one side only, but you cannot park on both sides. And cars are not parked out front. That's why we have the rear entrance, because it always looks nice because you don't drive down the street and see a row of cars. You just see like when I parked out in front of, I think right next to down the street from this house here, it's on the screen, and I parked there and walked up and down the street taking pictures, and it was kind of like a Norman Rockwell little feel. It's got little white picket fences in some of the houses, and it's every house, again, I think I already said this, not to be redundant, but every house will have a front porch of some kind. And some of these, by the way, I like, and some of these I don't like. So it's not every house you see if you go, that's not so great. We will create our own designs pattern after these with the ones that we really want to bring, you know, probably about 5 or 6 different floor plans. But what's interesting about this community, and as a P&Z committee, I think you'll appreciate this, like if you look at that row of houses, each one of those houses probably are the exact same floor plan. But the brilliance of that developer was that he took the same floor plan and made minor changes to it and changed the roof lines, and it made the house look like an entirely a brand new, you know, a different house. But it's actually the same floor plan.
The good news is we actually, for about a year now, have been talking about garden homes in Garden Ridge. So now you've given us some information, more specifics on what your vision is. I guess it comes down to the place, you know, where you said 2252 and 3009, which I thought previously was retail.
No. Okay, so I think you might be confused with that. So the corner is retail, and I do own that corner.
Okay.
And our plans are to develop that as retail.
Okay.
And so if you look on this little lot plan map that you see here, we also desired to put a road and that on the side of it, and that little road, the idea, the concept is that little road would go tie into a road of the retail. And so at some day when all that's developed, you could get in a golf cart or even walk over to a restaurant and eat.
To the retail, yeah.
Go, you know, if we can get like a pharmacy or something or whatever, you know, in other words, they can get in a golf cart and ride around and walk around or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like one, just a whole vision of both retail and residential combined.
My daughter and son-in-law, when they lived in Allen, they lived in a garden home type thing. Their garages were in the back also, but their fence went all the way to the alley. And trying to drive in there, you know, get my car in the driveway, you know, I'm parking right next to the fence. I hated that, but this is I like the way, if you plan to do the same thing, keep the back also open where, you know.
Yes.
You can see down the road, because they were living in a curb. I couldn't know if anybody's coming around the curb in the backyard.
To make that wide turn is hard, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was my concern with something like this, but you answered, if you do this, this is one concern I have.
It would remain open. You know, some of the things that we also, like you look at this here, you know, we're looking at is the front setback on homes now, what is the front setback? 45. So we would probably come to you and ask for a smaller setback, it's like 30 feet, because the lots are so small, we're trying to make these work and.
That actually is a discussion item on the ordinance right now.
Okay, well, we're on the same page.
What would it be for a garden home, you know?
Okay.
So,
And so my position right now is I have a contract. I don't own this lot right now. I have a contract on it. They've accepted my offer. And I have a due diligence period. I don't expect to get all of this done during that due diligence period. I've done this too long, too many years, so I get it. But if there's any way I could get some kind of feeling from the P&Z committee, if this is something you feel like you really would be interested in moving forward with in a positive light, because I'd hate to make a commitment on a piece of land. If you put yourself in my shoes, I'd hate to make a commitment on a piece of land and you guys go, no, I don't think so. And then I've got a very expensive piece of land that I'm going, what the heck am I going to do with this? Sell it to Nancy, I guess.
on the agenda, it's only a presentation. There's no discussion, there's no recommendation that the way the agenda's written, correct? Is that, so I'm gonna have to, we have to refer that to city administrator on decisions, what we can do, our attorney.
I think that I'm looking at it and it's ambitious. I like what I see. You're in luck that two of the commissioners live right across the street in Regency Oaks. And so we can visualize what you're talking about. Being a contrarian by nature, I remember some discussion, co-commissioners, that when we talked about that area, One of our concerns was the railroad. Okay, that's something for you to think about. The other thing I think I had concerns about, and city administrator, please stop me if I'm saying too much, but the way I understood it, the sewer wasn't necessarily going to extend past 3009. Am I erroneous in that?
Well, as that area develops, yes, the sewer will,
Okay.
be brought down in that direction.
I'm not sure how much more we can decide this evening. I'm not sure why don't you ask us what you would like to have this evening, and we can look at the city attorney. She says, shakes her head, no, we can't say
Yeah.
that, and we know we can't commit any further than that on this particular.
Yes, sir, I totally understand. And let me say, I know David lives in Regency. I don't know who else does. You do, okay. So I actually went and knocked on doors. I got out of my truck and went and knocked on doors in the very front of those 3 or 4 houses that were in the entrance there. Because I wanted to know, I specifically want to know about the railroad, because you brought up the railroad, sir. And I wanted to know if that was a real issue for them, because that was one of my concerns. Is this going to work? And it was interesting that every person I talked to said the railroad's not really an issue. It's the blasting from the quarry. And so, and I live right off of FM 2252 myself. You wouldn't know where I live because it's kind of hidden, but I live back cave into the woods, and I hear the train, and I've lived there for 25 years. I get to the point where it just doesn't. If you live there, you kind of understand. You just kind of get accustomed to it, and even at night, sometimes people think it's a little tranquil hearing the train in the background. The train going by, I've sat there in my truck before when a train is going by. You can't even hardly hear the train in a truck, which has very little to zero insulation. What you hear is that when they blow the horn, and they don't blow the horn until down the road going across Dewar Lane. And that's where you hear it, which, that's where it's going to be the loudest, is back in there. Of course, all of Garden Ridge probably hears it at some point, different places. So, but that is something I did do my homework on that, Dr. Miller, and that was my response. And so my question is there any way I could get a show of hand that this is something, as a P&Z committee, you would be interested in pursuing in a positive light?
No.
Is there a way I could do that? I can't do that? I'm not saying voting on it. Is there a way I could say you'd be interested, or no? I can't do that? No? Is there, let me ask, is there anything that I can ask that would give me some direction to sign a contract on this deal, or?
I think our city attorney is going to respond.
So
Okay.
what I can say is that, my apologies, but no, we can't do
Okay.
basically the equivalent of a straw poll.
Okay,
But what we can do is, you have made your presentation here. It would appear as though, just from the
Yes.
questions asked, that P&Z is interested in hearing more. However, what I do have to advise planning and zoning is that this is a project that, should it comes forward, you just have to know that you've got to make it fit within what's currently, in place. And to the extent that means, apologies to the developer here, to the extent that means, we may have to look closely at, possibly a change in zoning. We may have to look closely at, how to make that work within the existing parameters of the ordinance, with variances, as needed for setbacks, those sorts of things. So those are all things that the council is still welcome to consider in order for the developer to continue to pursue the project. So this project, it may very well be a viable project, and that will of course be, the option of the prerogative of P&Z and ultimately City Council. But if this project comes forward with sufficient enough details to begin initial reviews, the city is certainly in a position to where it could do so with what you currently have on the books and not have to worry overly much about, where are we at with getting the new zoning ordinance in place. And so historically, one of the things that has killed potential developments and plans for potential developments was the planning and zoning just initially did not receive sufficient plans or even thoughts of plans. For instance, here's the type of building that I want to build. This is the type of variance that we would be seeking. The city just never received enough details of any kind with which to be able to make a decision. So going with that, while we cannot, absolutely
No, I
guarantee
understand.
you anything, if you will review those ordinances, perhaps take a few minutes, and by a few minutes, it may be a few hours to go
A few
through.
days. Yeah.
Right, with the city administrator to verify and get perhaps as many, for lack of a better term, details worked out, so
Okay.
that when you bring something forward, it has sufficient enough detail so that the planning and zoning can make a decision, so that they're not looking at the city attorney saying, you're gonna have to default to your position of no variances, no change of zoning, because there's insufficient information here.
Okay,
So that's just kind of some tips that might help you
okay,
make a determination on how to proceed forward.
okay, thank you.
Shall I explain the process that how we're going to proceed with this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Of course, we're still working on the rewrite of our zoning ordinance to fit our new master land use plan. So the only thing that I have to provide me guidance at this point is our current zoning ordinance. When I look at our new master land use plan, it calls for that area basically retail. When I look at our current zoning map for this particular piece of property, along the frontage of the property and then back 300 feet, that property is zoned B1, which is our neighborhood services. Then the remainder of that property is zoned B2, which is office and professional. When I look at the uses that are allowed in those two zoning districts, residential is allowed, okay? So I revert back to, we require a special use permit on all commercial properties. So what Mr. Overman would have to do, the property would not have to be rezoned. This one, the first track was going to
Right.
have to be rezoned. But what Mr. Overman will have to do is apply for a special use permit. And in that special use permit, he is going to have to ask, he's going to present this garden home plan, okay? In that plan, though, he's going to have to go through our current residential zoning classification, and he is going to have to identify every variance that he needs to seek. Setbacks, whether it's side, front, impervious cover, size of the dwelling, because our ordinance minimum is 2,000 square feet, so if he wants something less, he's going to have to ask for that. It's just any number. It's going to be a lot of them. I think I ticked off, what, about 12?
Yeah,
About 12 variances, somewhere in that vicinity, give or take, a couple. variances for sure that he is going to have to seek through that special, well, he's going to have to ask for those variances, and then that special use permit will approve that project and document all those variances. So it's going to, he's going to have a lot of detail that he is going to have to present the commission with. It's going to take quite a bit of work on Mr. Overman and his team to get all of those, every variance that's necessary and presented for the commission. Of course, we're going to have the process of public hearings, and then, of course, planning and zoning makes recommendation to city council. So it is going to be a little bit of a lengthy process. Did I miss anything, city attorney?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
I'm going to have to ask for the plating as well, just.
Oh, then after the special use permit approval and the variances, if those are approved, then Mr. Overman will not be able, until that's done, there's no sense in him moving forward with plating until that's accomplished, because his plat is going to be dependent on those variances that are granted. So it is going to be a lengthy process, a very detailed process.
Can I ask a question? Is, if we do our homework, do our due diligence, and, you know, really spend the time on those ordinances and ask exactly what we need in that, can we accomplish that in one meeting, bringing that to the P&Z committee? If we have them all together, and, you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I mean, we should be able to. It would be, you're required a public hearing on the variances. I think we can do those all as a package in one public hearing. And then you're going to have a public hearing on the special use permit.
Can we do that? Can we combine that also with the
We
same
should
meeting?
be able to.
Well, technically, they're not combined, but they're heard back-to-back, same meeting.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
same meeting, but not.
Same meeting, but,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Different
That's-
requests, but yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, and I have one last question, sorry. Do you ever meet, other than do you meet once a month or twice a month? Do you ever meet other than once a month? Like, do you ever come together? You know, it's a long period when you're trying to get something done.
I think
Yeah.
up until April, March or April.
Yeah,
But there's also special called meetings that could happen too.
that could, okay.
So,
All right. Well, if there are no further questions, I thank you. I hope that you're interested in this, and we will go to work, and we will get it all done. I'm excited about it, and I hope we can excite you as well. So I guess we need to plan to be on the next P&Z meeting schedule, and
Well, remember, when we met, we talked about the timetable for public hearings.
right.
And the
public hearing.
timetable for the city's
Okay.
review, adequate review.
Okay.
So it's gonna be bearing on when y'all get the package to me,
Okay.
and when we determine that the package is complete,
Is adequate.
administratively complete, to be moved on to planning and zoning,
Okay.
then
So
that
we're going to
is-
get this to you first.
Yeah, send it
Okay.
to, yes,
Okay.
to
Okay.
me.
All right.
Then we'll start our due diligence on it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it. And thank you for serving here voluntarily. I know you don't make big incomes doing this.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
Business item 5B, approval of the minutes for March 10th, 2020 meeting, which was quite a while ago. I trust all of us have had time to look over them. I myself wasn't at that meeting, So I'll defer to the vice chair to see if we left anything out. Okay.
I make a motion that we approve the March minutes as written.
I have a motion. I'm waiting for a second.
A second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second for approval of the minutes for the March meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Passed. Move on to business item 5C. Discussions, reports, and updates, items applicable to P and Z discussed at the March 17th and March 24th City Council emergency meeting and the March 11th City Council special meeting. Excuse me, May 11th special meeting. To be truthful with you, I can't remember back that far when anything was passed on to bring to P and Z from those meetings. No, I think the subject of the day was, the coronavirus, and everybody was kind of focused on that. And I think everybody was focused on trying to get everything back up and running more than anything else.
Dr. Miller?
I was going to ask the city
I'd say
secretary.
one thing you might want to make sure they're all aware of is the amendment that was made to the declaration about the RV trailers, travel trailers.
Okay.
Was that a temporary change, though? That's what I thought, just for a period of time,
Okay.
for COVID.
Do you want me to explain that, Dr.
Please.
Miller?
Please, because she's going
Okay.
right over my head.
Our current zoning ordinance has a limitation on being able to park an RV in front of your property and allow dwelling in that RV after 7 days, any longer than 7 days. And what the city council did is they waived those requirements of our ordinance to allow for someone who perhaps was caring for someone, a family member, maybe their college-age student, family members were having to stay at home. There wasn't perhaps enough room in the home for them. Or if somebody was quarantining in one of those. However, we made it clear that we were going to monitor health and safety on that, and that will expire when our declaration expires, correct, Marissa? So it is still in effect at this point in time.
Thank you. Everybody else clear on it? I'm not sure how I missed that. Anything else?
Because it's been a long time.
I got it.
Not having planning and zoning meetings until the end of April.
I'm sorry?
One of the declaration, or one of the precautionary measures that we did adopt that pertain to planning and zoning, as well as other commissions, is we suspended y'all's meetings through the end of April.
Okay.
And May.
It's no longer enforced.
Anything else I missed? Nothing? Well, we'll move down to business item 5C2, which is our old standby discussion on ordinance 210. I don't know if anything came up with 210 in our time away, our hiatus from having meetings. Anything come to think of? Along this same line, I know at one time never mind. I guess we can move on to 5.3, which is Freeze and Nichols, the rewrite assistance we had. We had a meeting of the technical committee, what was it, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and we went through the cleaned up version, if you will, of the ordinance, and we got quite a ways into the ordinance. I think page 101 or something like that. So we got some pages left, but the meat was discussed for the most part. We'll have to set another date so we can finish it up. And then our charge will be figuring out how to present this information to city council. And we'll rely on the strategic subcommittee, I guess, to figure out how we're going to put it together with city council. And although it sounds like we're getting close, we've been with this slog for the last 2 years, so I'm you have to excuse me if I'm not real excited right now, because I don't know what's going to be around the next corner. We thought we were close last year, but it was about August or so, and then the legislature threw us a big wrench. But we're going to have another meeting to get through the rest of the ordinance and go from there. I'm not sure if the city attorney had prepared a little small presentation about what we've done, or we should talk about what we've done or accomplished or whatever.
Yes, sir. I think it'd be appropriate to just give everybody kind of an overview of what we accomplished and how far we got. So pre-corona, one of the things that we emphasized was that, you know, I would go through and start really honing in on the pieces of things that we parsed out were legal and for legal review, and then those things that were policy driven, and those things apply more towards the actual zoning and zoning ordinance itself. So for instance, you know, the difference between the two, zoning policy is, you know, how far do we want those setbacks to be, how many feet, you know, how much impervious cover, that's all policy decision. And then the legal review was, all right, you know, how do we have, you know, these charts set up for, you know, who recommends, who decides, where that appeal goes, that sort of thing. The legal effect of some of the proposed revisions within the ordinance itself. So I'm going to just kind of give you all the overview of that, and I'm not necessarily going to, I'm not sure, did they have a copy? Okay. So I will give you all a, for instance, in the use chart, or I call it the use chart, but the chart that is on page, the summary of approvals, of approval authority, and it's section 1.02.05. And so, you know, as we were trying to focus in on, you know, the policy and just trying to get the project moved forward, we circled back, we being the attorney team, and that was Habib Khan and myself, going back through this fine-tooth comb and just really gave it a raking over the coals and started making some changes and some proposed changes. So in that use chart, 1.0205, and it's my page 7, so it's going to be around page 6 to 8, somewhere through there. Okay. So within there, when we got, you know, took a closer look, we realized that there was some provisions in here that had the planning and zoning acting as a deciding committee. And so for legal purposes and for how, you know, historically this has been set up, and I think how the council wants to see this coming forward, is that planning and zoning will remain a recommending body. And so that whatever preliminary plans and reviews need to come through P&Z, they will come through city administrator. She will review for certain things, primarily for administrative completeness, to ensure that everything is in a packet the way that it should be before it ever even hits planning and zoning to review, to start asking the hard questions and start making the hard determinations. Planning and zoning will then make those recommendations the way that it currently does, And then, you know, that ultimately goes forward to city council for that final decision-making process. And like I said, we did that for two reasons. One is that we think that's the direction that council wants to, you know, keep that in. And the second reason, and our primary reason from the legal aspect, is that if the Planning and Zoning Commission moves to a decision-making body, then that exposes the Planning and Zoning Commission to legal liability that it doesn't currently entail when it makes recommendations and decisions. So with that, you know, that chart is going to be, revised up. It's currently redlined, but you know, when it comes through to you, that chart will be revised, and there will actually be a column that's taken out so that it will now just read city administrator, you know, recommendation, review, planning and zoning recommendation, city council, final decision making, and of course, city council sitting as the zoning board of adjustments as well. So that was one of the big changes there. Then moving forward, in the use charts, what we determined for the use charts that are in and around page 25, 26, in that section, what we determined was that we would go through there and revise the use charts. We had a couple of uses that were missing that I know as a group we strongly wanted to be included in there, and that was to ensure that we set up a zoning district for sexually oriented businesses and a zoning district for tattoo shops or something of those natures, so that we will be plugging that in. But more importantly, what we also determined is that we will be taking those uses out that currently do not exist within Garden Ridge, of which the proposed land use plan doesn't accommodate, and of which the city at this particular point in time has indicated there's no interest in. And so I will give you a for instance. I believe that the use chart itself still has notations in there for hotels. And so nothing within the existing ordinances, development ordinances, and the proposed ordinances accommodate a hotel. So to the extent that we identified a couple of uses that there just are no plans for, our recommendation is that those will just be removed from the use chart in their entirety. One of the other things that we also indicated is that we are going to be placing a few additional, what I refer to as guideposts, within the document. So at the beginning of the document, we have a statement in there that the city administrator will serve as the zoning administrator, and part of her job as the zoning administrator will be that preliminary review of any plans coming forward. And in the event that there is a use that we have not identified, she will take the first stab at analogizing that use to something that exists within the ordinance, or just giving a straight up, response that says, this is not a use contemplated by the city of Garden Ridge, and you are going to have to go through this separate set of procedures in order to try to get that use approved in whatever area that you're looking, to develop in. So I think we will mark this to indicate that exists within there. Like I said, it's going to be more of just of a guidepost note to folks to make sure everybody's aware of that, because one of the things that I had in my notes from the last meeting was that there was a real concern of what if we miss a use and somebody comes to us with that use. And so the answer is, if it's not a use that we have provided for, and it's not a use that we can analogize to something that is existing on the books, then the answer is no. That's the preliminary answer. Now, there will be procedures for somebody to bring a proposed use and go through that process, but the initial response is, no, we don't have that. Perhaps we can accommodate you going through the correct process, but we cannot issue you a certificate of occupancy for, you know, whatever X, Y, and Z might be. So the city has those built-in controls, you know, within the ordinance, and we just, the thing to remember is that simply because a use doesn't exist doesn't mean it's a prohibited use. It's just maybe something we hadn't thought about, and now we do need to consider. So there will be those procedural mechanisms within the ordinance that will take care of that scenario, you know, if it arises. Going forward, I did recommend that the group living, most of what was provided to us as the base ordinance for the group living scenarios was spot on. There are some minor revisions that we as your legal staff feel that are going to need to be made, and those are going to be just more in the terminology. So the city can still, you know, even though it is a group standards or a community home, and we know that those things are regulated by the state, so what has been drafted here is to work with and complement those provisions that exist within state law that the city is required to have to follow. And I know at some point in time we had a presentation here regarding group homes and community homes, and so we just have to you know, make sure that everybody, you know, just stays aware of that what we have here is probably the strongest that we can get without being violative of state and federal law. And so one of the things was that we noted, and so this is one of those things that it's not necessarily wrong, but where we can foreclose any legal issues, we will. And so for instance, we have a group living operating, and we currently had it as a conditional use permit, which sort of kind of signals or flags that perhaps you will get this and perhaps you will not. And so these uses have a right of use regardless of whatever the zoning is, so long as they comply with state law. So what we're going to opt to do is just, they still have to go through that permitting process to ensure that they have met the state law requirements, that they have those safety inspections that are absolutely required, but it's not a conditional use permit, it's just an operating use permit for that type of home. Small tweak, but it helps to foreclose anybody, you know, doing just a peripheral review of the zoning ordinance and say protest, and kind of forecloses that type of challenge. Moving forward, I know y'all are just dying to get to. Moving forward, we also made a decision that for those accessory uses that we were going to require to be a certain distance from a residential or a certain distance from the street or those sorts of things, that we would go through and kind of unify those requirements so that one requirement for this type of drive-through was 500 feet, another drive-through, a similar scenario, but a different drive-through was 200 feet. So what we said was it makes more sense and is more defensible to pick a standard, set that as the standard, and if somebody has a plan that doesn't fit that standard, well then they follow the variance process to come forward. And so you'll be seeing those changes as well. But the idea behind that was to make the ordinance as uniform as possible, to forego, you know, again, claims that this type of business was treated this way, that type of development was treated a different way, and kind of unify all of that.
500 feet.
Okay. Then we had a big question regarding non-depository financial institutions and payday lending. And so there are some changes that are going to be forthcoming there. That's going to be around page 36, 35, 36. One of the things that Habib had pointed out to us was, and I didn't spot it, was that we need to make sure that we account for these in the use chart. And so we're just going to backtrack and make sure that it's accounted for within the use chart as to what zoning districts that those may fall in. And that was the benefit of a second pair of eyes, because I would have not caught that. The other thing was that we had initially instituted 1,000 feet from any lot containing another non-depository financial, again, payday lending type of thing. And we have determined that that would be preempted by the Texas Local Government Code, and that needs to be to that 500 buffer standard that we're going to adopt kind of just across the board within the ordinance itself. And there are other changes within here that I'm just going to touch base briefly on so that we can really hit the big ticket items. I know one of the other issues we had was the height of fences for outdoor storage. At the time, P&Z said, hey, we think 8 feet is going to be necessary. And then in the technical committee, I really urged for a 6-foot fence. And the reason that I re-urged for a 6-foot fence is because of for law enforcement and security reasons. In working with another city, I came across a scenario that really drove this home for me. With that city has that it allows 8-foot fences. And so for that particular city, they contacted the firm, and we're going to be handling a code compliance case for them, because as this lot was designed and where it's at, the property owner built an 8-foot wall from, on the street side. And so from the street side, where officers and a code officer has the legal right to review and see what's, hey, I see something over there. Those persons that could enforce the ordinance had no view whatsoever. And so that property owner then proceeded to build buildings without benefit of any permits, without benefit of any inspections, and is running what appears to be perhaps an undesirable business. A very undesirable business. The problem is that it all occurred behind an 8-foot fence, which nobody could see behind. And so I'm going to re-urge the 6-foot fence issue on that. I know we had a lot of discussion about, those properties on the hill might be able to see down. But I think for safety and security and code enforcement purposes, we need to be able to see what's going on behind a fence. And so, I'll just take any, there are 2 or 3, if not more, officers here in Garden Ridge who are tasked with code enforcement, who could probably do nothing more than crane their neck a little bit and have a perfect view over 6-foot fence to see that's a building that's not been there before, and make the necessary inquiries and alert the city as needed. So that's, that was kind of that was a hot ticket item for me. We are going to have some cleanup of whether it's a city building official or city building inspector, and I will leave that to staff to kind of do the search and change for that. Short-term rentals, what I will tell y'all there is I'm still doing the research on short-term rentals, so I don't have a very good definitive answer on how we can, what we can incorporate within the ordinance, but hope to have that for y'all soon so we can put that one to bed and make a decision there. The dimensional use chart regarding the setbacks and all that, that's purely policy decision, so that is, you know, for the good discretion of P&Z and council to make those changes. There was some discussion on what and how, but as that was policy decision, I will let y'all kind of, you know, review that and go through that process. And then okay, so we're gonna hit the kind of the big ticket items. So within here, you know, Habib had placed a couple of questions saying, you know, how is this going to work with the new building material regulations? And so to the extent that we have some places in here where we refer to, for instance, screening and fencing. So to the extent that the screening and fencing is a standalone item, let's say somebody doesn't currently have a fence, but wants to now erect a fence, the city, we believe, can still control, you know, what type of fence goes up, and certainly can prohibit such things such as barbed wire, you know, and continue to uphold that regulation, because it is currently on the books, no barbed wire. There is, I think, one or two places where it might be an exception, but I don't recall that off the top of my head. But so to the extent, like I said, that's going to be a standalone item, we think that would survive. Then moving forward is where we really kind of hit the big issues. I know we had a lot of discussion regarding the possibility of some form of incentive program for building standards and building materials uses. And so our response to that was that while it was a good shot and a good first impression done by Freese and Nichols, at this point in time, we just don't have enough information on the books to be able to say, sure, P&Z, we can do this, refer that up to city council. We can make no guarantees that would survive constitutionality and that the city wouldn't be the first guinea pig to see a challenge to attempting something of that nature. So to the extent that was a large section of the code, we're basically going to be striking that out and just replacing it with, you know, a standard recitation of, you know, the city will observe, you know, new legislation in HB from hell. But I don't, that's what I refer to it as, but whatever the number is, I apologize, I don't remember the numbers, but, and then say, you know, the city observes, you know, has adopted building codes as of such edition, and, you know, those 3 cycles are, you know, in effect. So it'll be just basically a standard recitation or something along those lines. The pieces that refer to certain things, like we saw in the presentation, roof articulations and those things that are cosmetic, but that don't necessarily reach the building material itself, I think that the city can still hold on to those pieces of it because it makes for interesting house plans and it makes for a nice development and a nice community. And we don't necessarily have to regulate the actual building material itself to say, you know, pitched roofs and you know, just some things that make it architecturally interesting. So we're going to look to try to preserve those pieces where we can. There was a couple of places here within the ordinance where there was some questions regarding fee in lieu of, you know, as it applied to developers perhaps not wanting to wanting to pay a fee in lieu of development for, say, parkings, because I know parking was one of the questions within here, and tree preservation as well. And so the big question on that was how do we make that statutorily compliant? And so the city may adopt such provisions. So let's say somebody has, that the city makes a determination with a development, we need X number of green space or park space, but to the extent that developer doesn't want to do that, they will pay X number of dollars, which is the calculated amount, and it is a set amount, the city will, or the developer will pay that to the city, and then the city would say, let's say if it's a parks in lieu of fee, the city would then turn around, place those funds in a properly established bank account for such funds, and then those funds get used for park and park maintenance throughout the city. So those fees, can be established. They would just take some additional actions on the back end to get them properly set up. And I'm kind of fast forwarding through to the big ticket items. Page 64. I know we've had a lot of discussion regarding connection of accessory structures through that strip of concrete, or whatever is used to try to connect them to enable you to get more structures than is allowed. So what we have here within the ordinance is the complete opposite of what's currently existing on the books. So what we're going to do there is basically, again, insert a guidepost, something that says, if you currently have something like that and it's existing on the ground, you get to keep it because it's, it was in place at the time of the adoption of this current ordinance whenever it gets adopted. And just clearly signal that if you have it, you have it, and you can have that until such time as the use changes, but going forward, it is no more. To try to gain control of the numbers of structures and accessory structures on the property. So we're going to be kind of footnoting that to make sure that people understand, so we don't get a big rush or concern that, well, wait a minute, I have that now, what do I do with it? Well, just continue to use it and enjoy it because you got in while the getting was good, but going forward, no more. And then fast forwarding to page 66 and the building materials. So that's where a good chunk of changes are going to be taking place. We're currently kind of working through that. We did have some discussion regarding, would the city be interested in developing some other form of incentive program? And so we will be probably at some time in the near future, bringing forward, or approaching council with some thought process on that to see, is the council interested in pursuing that? If so, what's their directive to the city attorney to put together such a plan? And that's generally referred to as Chapter 380 agreements. And so Chapter 380 is just a very short and small provision in the government code, local government code, that authorizes cities to adopt a program that allows for a set schedule of incentives in order to bring forward the type of development that it would like to see within the city. And so And so that one is basically a policy decision that gets made at the city council level. However, they may direct P&Z to do some preliminaries on that. So I mention it here just so that if it does come forward to P&Z, you'll at least say, yes, I recall we briefly discussed that. And of course, if that's the directive, we'll bring forward. Many of these programs are within the firm, we have, a wide database of what various programs look like, in numerous different types of cities, numerous different types of settings, so we can help y'all adjust and tailor one that might be beneficial to the city, if council chooses to go in that direction. The next issue we had, which was a question from Habib, is the issue of storage and use of vehicles and equipment in residential zoning. And this is basically recreational vehicles, trailers, boats, that sort of thing. And so the existing rule in the current zoning ordinance is that you park those, they either have to be covered parking, and there's a standard for the covered parking, or they have to be behind the, the plane, or the front plane of the house for parking. And so the big question was from Habib was that, how do you make that work? And his background on that was that, the city of San Antonio had an issue with that several years back. But to the extent that that is a part of the current zoning ordinance, has been a part of the zoning ordinance, and continues to be a part of the zoning ordinance, I don't see that as an issue. If we were, trying to make some sudden swoop to residential properties that would require them to make a change to meet that requirement, that would be an issue, but that's not the purpose here. It's just to preserve what's already on the books. Okay, then we had basically the same sort of issue with reference to high quality design incentives for residential designs. And so any reference to that we'll be striking from it because, like I said, my second set of eyes pounced on it right away and said that's just a pretext for trying to say that you don't want to follow the new building materials regulations. So we're going to be, kind of doing a hunt and search to make sure that we get that struck from the ordinance in its entirety. And there again, some of these references were put in there and were made, either prior to or right at the time that these changes came through. We had a brief discussion on color. The city is still allowed to regulate color and color palette, so we don't have a big issue with that. Roof design standards, I think we can still require, or request, some articulation, something that makes the roof look, interesting and such. So I think we're okay there. There was a big section within here regarding lighting, and the reference there was that perhaps the city may want to start seriously considering a dark skies type of ordinance. And so I think I know Councilwoman Bauer has kind of been an advocate for dark skies for a little bit here. And so, this may be the time period where we really need to start thinking about, how to make that happen if that's the direction that the city wants to go in.
My thoughts were that with this section on lighting was meeting the requirements for dark skies, though. So yours just saying a separate ordinance instead of being in here, is that what you're saying?
Right, right. So I think, we can still get some of these some good common sense lighting requirements, here within the ordinance, but, to the extent that this was almost written towards the dark sky, I think the better option would be for the city to consider, just an out-and-out adoption of dark skies and try to get that certification. I think it would be beneficial. But that may just be because I like the idea. Y'all may, as a policy decision, say, we don't like that so much. We did give some homework to the technical group regarding flagpoles. We need to ensure that the flagpole regulations are the same across the board, from the sign ordinance, to ensure that we've got all the regulations basically being the same and consistent in the sign ordinance.
The reference to flagpoles here on page 84 is really concerning under lighting, though. It's under the
Right.
lighting section, so.
Right.
It doesn't really cover the whole thing, flagpole, it just covers the lighting. If you have one, you have to, when you have lights and when you don't.
Right, and if you go down, it's my page, let me see what page I'm on. 84, item H, flagpoles, but then it also gets in there to flagpoles with a height greater than 20 feet above ground level. And it goes through there, and so we just need to make sure that the footage and the height of the flagpoles, is consistent across the board. I know it's been a little while back, but we bumped into an issue.
In the zoning ordinance, we've added in current zoning ordinance, there's a section that talks about flagpoles in residential and in commercial areas, and it tells you where they can be built, basically. They have to follow setbacks, and they have to be so far from adjoining properties. So we'll get that incorporated, that language incorporated into this ordinance. As well as making sure that language in here matches zoning and sign ordinance as it currently sits.
And then I'm gonna kind of fast forward us a little bit to a couple more of the what I refer to as the bigger ticket items. Page 93. So starting on page 93, we have reference to nuisances. And we have a lot of detail in here within this section that references nuisances. And so the issue is, while they're a good idea, but the city currently controls a lot of these nuisances via the nuisance ordinance. And so to the extent that this is probably better served being in a nuisance ordinance, we're going to strike it out of this particular section. Now, every zoning ordinance is going to have a brief reference to nuisance that says you can't use your property, in nuisance and in violation of, somebody else's property rights, that sort of thing. There's always that type of statement, but the detailed nuisance issues, like I said, are controlled by the city via separate ordinance, so we'll be making some pretty big revisions there as well. And I think those were the really big issues. There's a couple of things within the application processing that we're going to be changing. There were some deadlines. I won't say that they were arbitrary deadlines, but to the extent that that there isn't that short of a deadline within the statutory requirements, we're going to be taking those short deadlines out of the process so that on the front end, the city has, as much time, as it can legitimately have under state law to get reviews and preliminary things done before things push forward. So I'll give you, for instance, on page 100, there's a reference to an application is deemed complete on the 11th business day. Well, there's no requirement of that within the statutes that something has to be deemed complete to move forward to the next level on a certain day. There are those requirements if you're platting, and platting has always had those references, and then there's some new guidelines that trigger development plans when they come through, but not to the actual application process itself. And so, to the extent that Nancy gets an application and oopsie, somebody forgot to include their check, well, we're just going to hold here until your check for this process comes in. Whether that's 2 weeks or 2 months, it waits for you. Or to the extent that Nancy finds that there's not, something within the required forms that needs to come in, well, as this is written, something could be deemed approved on the 11th day, and that's not accurate. So we're just going to making some of those changes within this section. And like I say, the city is certainly welcome to, as a policy, adopt those things, but we think the better thing is to allow as much time as we can legally get, on the front end to review applications and make sure everything, check the box, that everything that the planning and zoning and ultimately the city council needs, to make good decisions. And I think those were the big ticket items, and as far as we got, did I? And then there was one other thing, I apologize, I lied. One other thing that I did want to go over with y'all here in planning and zoning, because it was a question that came up at one of the council meetings. And the issue is the zoning map versus future land use plan. And so should these questions come up, or if y'all get approached with this, they are two different things, two different tools, and serve two different functions. So that the zoning map is always controlling of the zoning district and zoning boundaries and what people actually have to comply to. So as Nancy was talking about earlier with the presentation, that property has a current zoning. It's a B1 or a B2, depending on what side of the property you're on. These are the allowed uses within that. That comes from the zoning map. You must comply with that. Future land use plan says we've got some areas that either are not developed and need to be developed, or hopefully we'll see development, or in the future, if they get redeveloped, this is how we'd like them to develop out. So we created some additional categories that the city didn't currently have. Some land, we're looking at some light retail, some planned use development, and a couple of other things. And so that's looking forward where the city would like to get to. And ultimately, at some point in time, the zoning map and a future land use map are going to look remarkably the same or have a lot of things in common, but they are two different things. So the future land use plan is just a planning and development tool to be able to steer the development of the city, going forward. So big that was kind of the one big questions that we had. I just wanted to make sure to cover and go through. And now I think I will say, I think I'm done.
So going back to the map, processing. So the process for, going from, changing the zoning map is the property owner has to make a request, correct? To change it. So it's not us really. We're not going to change the zoning map per se.
Right. So this zoning rewrite doesn't change the zoning map per se. So the city can say unilaterally, we want to rezone a certain piece of property, and go through that notice process and go through that entire procedure. The city, I mean, that is one way to change the zoning map. But generally speaking, you know, property owners normally drive zoning use changes, right? Because they will want a different use. And then, of course, you know, that's when you start looking at those tools. And so to the extent, you know, we've got something now designed and planned, you know, that we want to be able to make this mixed use, a certain section mixed use, and, you know, some plan use development in there, you know, to the extent that somebody now says, nah, I think I want to, you know, change this to heavy industrial, and it's not currently zoned heavy industrial, and that's not where we want to have heavy industrial, then, you know, we'll hear you out. You're certainly welcome to apply, but just be aware that the answer could very likely be no, because that's not what we're planning or where we're going with that. So, like I said, pretty extreme example there, but you guys get it. And then there were a couple of other legal things that I'm working on. We'll get that through. And so what we're trying to do is, rather than have a couple of different versions of the ordinance floating about, once I get changes and things done, that will be forwarded to Marissa. She will make all of those changes and get everything onto one ordinance, draft ordinance that goes out to everybody, and then that way going forward, we're always going to be on the same page moving forward. Do y'all have any questions, anything y'all would like me to go over?
Well, for the sake of the other commissioners that are not in the technical group, what Marissa put in your box is the current version and what we reviewed that at the technical meeting. But there's still changes to that coming forward, and those are some of the changes that she went over tonight. But just like version 1, verse 2, verse, you know, we can move those aside and go with this most recent, I think, is the cleanest so far. I mean, I had a notebook this thick with the first one, and then,
Yeah, right.
so I kind of put that in the shred box for Saturday. So, this is your good.
Right. So
copy.
we are going to be working from this going forward. And I think, to be perfectly honest, I think we are a lot closer once we sat down and really just culled through it. I think we are a lot closer than we originally thought that we were to be able to getting something to be able to propose to council.
Is Friends of Nickel at this point out? It sounds like y'all, we're doing everything in-house now. Friends of Nickel. Is Friends of Nichols out now? We're just doing everything in-house, or are we still just using them?
I feel that we're at the point where, unless we really need Friesen Nichols to come back in, I think we're at the point where between our city attorney and the technical committee and planning and zoning that we can move forward with the remainder. Friesen Nichols gave us a good document to start with to kind of develop, put all of the thoughts together. And now we're having to cull through that and make sure that everything aligns legally, as well as, you know, of course, the desires of planning and zoning, and then for your recommendation to council. One thing that I don't know if y'all are aware is that once you have a document that you want to recommend to city council, you are going to have a public hearing on it. And after that public hearing, then you make your recommendation to city council. So that is, I know we've talked about moving it forward to city council, but we weren't anywhere close to where we could really talk about that. I know I was relieved after the technical committee went through this version here. After that first meeting we had, I felt, my goodness, we are a lot closer than what we anticipated. And then the technical committee needs to get back together, which hopefully we will be able to accomplish that before our next P&Z meeting, and finish going through this document. And then hopefully we will be ready to hand it over to y'all for y'all's further review.
And I really thank Cynthia and Habib, because they clarified a lot of legal stuff that we weren't able to do. So I really appreciate all the comments you put in here and the thought process, so thank you for that.
Oh,
'Cause
you bet, you bet. I've been doing this for a little while now, but certainly not long as Habib has done this. And what I will say with this, I am always very grateful to have the benefit of his knowledge, because he was like, it's this case, you need to look that up and read that. Well, and I'll be, yes, sir, you're absolutely correct, okay.
Well, I got to a point today where I said, okay, I'm done.
Well, yeah,
I'm taking
you know.
all the legal.
Right,
I really
right,
appreciated
but,
that, yeah, because I said,
yeah.
there's nothing that we could do that, you know, that
Right.
type of
Well,
thing.
you know, and Habib, for a very long time before he transitioned over, he was development counsel, so he represented developers across the state. He was on the other side of, you know, and so when he looked at this, I mean, he looked at it with an eye of a developer challenging the ordinance, and it really pointed out, you know, some things that we needed to tweak up a little bit.
Makes me feel a lot more comfortable.
Me too.
Any other questions from the commission? We move on to 5D then, future agenda items. Suggestions from the commissioners? I have several. And I wrote some of them down. I want to be assured that, I think we need to discuss the strategic committee and what their role will be going forward. And maybe what I'd like to do is to charge the commissioners with thinking about that for the next meeting, okay? To think what we want to put forward to them, or how we think we want to present it to city council.
Well, can I just throw something out here? Well, because,
Please,
you know,
please.
we've kind of been throwing that around a little bit. I guess well, first of all, Dower, is it you and Hire that are now working, okay, with the strategic committee? My thought was, once we get through the next technical meeting, get all that, you know, reviewed and notated and all, and give it to the commissioners, and then we go through the whole, you know, one more time, the review. In other words, I believe the strategic committee would be our sounding board before going to total council. Because you have 2 commissioners and then 2 councilmen on the strategic committee. So if the commissioners are then, you know, presenting to the 2 councilmen, and they go saying no, well, then we know the city council is not going to be, you know, okay with where we are. But I'm thinking if once that group meets with the almost finished product, that we'll have our, like I said, they're the sounding board, then we'll kind of have an idea that this is what council is probably going to be okay with. I mean, that's what, you know, that's what I was thinking it was going to be. But it could always change. So.
And that's what I wanted to discuss, Karen, because I think each of us has a different idea of what that's going to be about. I'm glad you expressed yours already, because it wasn't quite what I had in mind. But I think we need discussion on it, and I want to put that on the agenda for next time. Dave, you got your finger on the button, like you want to say something?
Well, that strategic committee's role has changed. That's why I would say it's a moving tennis ball. The lack of better understanding. Because first it was designed to try to push reading all this and getting it to the stage it's at now. How can we hurry it up? And then that went by the wayside. So now we're going to have to redesign that of what our task is supposed to be. So David and I and the two council members can start putting what we're supposed to pick out and approach and test the waters with.
Chairman Miller, y'all can't discuss
Okay.
that item. You can discuss putting it on the future agenda, but cannot go into this detailed discussion.
Okay. Again, I say let's put it on the agenda for later. Several things came up in presentation today that I was not concerned about. I want to make sure it goes forward to the two commissioners that aren't here. Number one, the handouts, will they have, I'm talking to the city secretary now, will they have access to those handouts we got before the next committee meeting, commission meeting, excuse me?
Yes,
Okay.
however, I need to use somebody's first 2 pages so I can make copies, because he gave me exactly 5 of just the first 2 pages.
Okay.
And then I plan on emailing them to the whole commission so that y'all had it electronically as well.
Okay, okay. I also put on the agenda for discussion, I guess under the auspices of ordinance 210s, the possibility of special meetings or going back to 2 meetings a month if necessary. And I say that only because, and you've heard me say this before, if you've been on the commission for a while, I've asked the city administrator, are we currently structured in the city and within your department to handle what I anticipate is going to be a hell of a workload? You've got what you're doing now. We've got the virus. We have the sewer. We have expansion of TxDOT's expansion. We have a handful, 12 or 13 or variances coming. And is there I want to have a discussion about whether the city is prepared to handle the workload as we see coming down the road. Anybody else want to put it on the agenda? Anything else to go on the agenda?
I don't understand how we would discuss it.
We would, what I need, I guess what I need is reassurances.
Okay.
Again.
From the city,
You had it-
from
you had
the
this
administrator.
Yeah,
agenda item.
yeah,
It's on-
yeah,
It's on the agenda.
yeah. I guess that's what I mean. I'm just seeing, and like, as I anticipated a year ago, I said, when things take off, there may be a problem. And it may include, let me put it in a positive way. What can we do to help? As the commission, what can the commission do to help? Okay? Don't add another meeting. Then, well, that's good. That's helpful, because first thing I said is that we just have another meeting, we can knock out some of the stuff, but it means more work for you guys. And we need to hear that, yeah.
Cut the meetings in half.
Any other, any other suggestions for the agenda? Dave?
Can we do a text dot update?
Probably could, probably can. Anything else? Then we can move into the citizens' comment period. Citizen? Put another one on your account. There's no citizen comments in the citizen comment period. Then I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
A motion to adjourn?
I have a motion and a second for adjournment. Adjournment will be at 7:39 hours. Next meeting is July 14th, 2020 at 6 p.m. here in the City Hall. We are adjourned.